the Cannabis Business Coach.
Hi, Mike Z here, author of the Cannabis Business Book, and you're listening to the Cannabis Business Coach podcast, where I chat with and coach the highest performing entrepreneurs in the cannabis industry.
Hi, Mike Z is. Hi, Mike Z is. Hi, Mike Z is the Cannabis Business Coach.
Hi, Mike Z here, and on today's episode, I'm joined by Bethany Niebauer, who is the founder of Axial Resolutions, relatively new mediation firm in the cannabis industry. And Bethany, thank you for being here. I'm looking forward to hearing more about your new venture. So before we get into that, though, I'm curious to ask you, how and why did you get into the cannabis industry?
Great question. And thank you so much for having me, Michael. I got into the cannabis industry almost exactly 10 years ago. I had finished law school and was kind of looking for my first job and wasn't, it was clear that the plans I had when I entered law school weren't going to pan out. So I was in a what do I do now kind of moment, and started attending networking events. Just started meeting people and sort of found my way to a consulting firm that was preparing license applications in emerging markets. So I got to use my writing and research skills to help win licenses back when applications were still fiercely competitive.
And tell me a little more about that, because I know you've had some in that decade, you've had some pretty impressive experiences and a variety of experiences. So is there anything in particular that, you remember especially fondly or
Yeah,
a few
license
proud of?
apps have changed tremendously in the past 10 years. It used to be that they were behemoths of paperwork. They could be very easily hundreds and sometimes thousands of pages. And they, back in these days, back in the dark ages, they tended to be submitted in person. So you had to print all of this and assemble it. Now we don't see that so much. They're submitted mostly online, but you used to have to make an appointment. You had to dress up. There was one state that wanted it submitted by courier. So UPS or USPS, not good enough. We need a, not you, but a different person in a uniform to submit this, or else don't call us. And now, even apart from that, with the advent of AI, I am starting to see a lot of people use AI to write applications. I haven't seen people win licenses with AI, so I don't know if it's effective just yet. But I think that problem will most likely take care of itself within the next, I don't know, 5 years. So that's one of the reasons I'm pivoting away from license applications towards mediation. And the simple fact that we are running out of states, because marijuana has been wildly popular. Lots of states are adopting it. There's only a few holdouts at this point. So I think, unfortunately, those days are largely numbered.
Right. And so there's definitely no shortage of conflicts within the industry. So I can understand why you're going into mediation, but tell me more about it as far as what you've seen in terms of the need for mediation and kind of how that looks in this industry.
I am seeing a lot of need for it. We are kind of a fractious industry, and I think, unfortunately, we are famous for our business divorces, which is really unfortunate. So there is a lot of need to help people figure out how to resolve things calmly and peacefully. I also think the cannabis industry is more networked than other industries. We have relied, I think, my theory, and I would love to hear yours, Michael, about why we are so networked and why relationships are so crucial, is because we kind of built this industry from the ground up, right? And it is too big for any one person to build on her own. We have needed cultivators, processors, dispensaries. We need the people touching the plant, and then we need all of the ancillary, the POS systems, the KPI monitors, we need the compliance people. It's too much for any one person to do. So we have relied on each other to build something. And I think that is why relationships are so crucial. What do you have a take on that? Like, I really like asking people why they think the industry is so networked.
And I love sharing my takes. So thanks for asking. I happen to agree with you. I think it's a combination of kind of, I guess, the legacy market and how before we had a legal industry, it was all about relationships and who you knew, and that was largely how you operated. You couldn't do it if you didn't have the connection or the plug or the distribution or whatever. And then I think in the modern industry, that's translated over to, it started, I think it's a little different now, but in the early days, it was, even 10 years ago when the two of us were getting into it, it was still fairly small and new, and there were only a handful of lunatics or first movers or innovators or whatnot who cared enough about this to be all in and to be dedicated to it. And so when I went around events all over the country, you would see the same people over and over and soon realize that, oh, this isn't such a huge industry, or there, it's not a, I shouldn't say that, not a huge industry, not a huge community of people who are really driving it. So I agree with you, but the question I want to ask you is, you said these can the industry is notorious for business divorces. Why do you think that is? Why do you think, well, I guess two-part question. Do you think that's more common in cannabis than in other industries? And if so, why? And if not, I don't know. I'm just curious because I've certainly, I've been involved in one myself. I've seen and heard of many others. But I wonder, is it just because we're such a small, tight-knit community that you hear about it more? Or is it actually more common in cannabis?
Yeah, I don't have a perspective on if it's more common or if we just hear about it more. But it is, when we hear about it, it is loud. That's what I know. And
And messy.
also, yeah, and messy. And I think there's something to be said for when this industry started, it was booming and roaring. There was lots of money to be made. There were plenty of resources, and now we're seeing a lot of consolidation. Resources are fewer, and it's just human nature. When we have to fight for resources, we will fight with each other. That's part of the species. That's not unique to this industry. So now that we are seeing consolidation, we need to preserve the relationships we have, because the industry is getting smaller now, not bigger. I think relationships are just really crucial, and it's important to preserve them whenever we have the opportunity. Because I think the idea that you can sort of just cut ties with somebody and never have to work with them again, that's probably becoming false. We are probably going to have to repair bridges rather than just set them on fire.
Yeah. And I guess I'm curious if you think the regulatory landscape contributes to these potential business conflicts or divorces, because, I can imagine thinking back to even like 5 years ago, or, thinking to newer markets where, if I'm not mistaken, you're in Colorado. And
Correct.
so, obviously a more mature market than here in New York, let's say, where we're still very much in the startup and growth phase. I think we've just hit, like, I'm almost reluctant to say we just hit critical mass, maybe, and things will hopefully accelerate, and we'll get to the potential that was promised. But you're still seeing a lot of new entities and new businesses, and from what I see, there's a lot of these. I'm not going to call them odd couples, but you end up having these partnerships of, here's a finance person or an investor, here's an operator, here's a, maybe a legacy person, here's a whatever. And so you're getting these teams of people that may or may not actually have great relationships, or come from the same culture or background or values. And yes, although they're all maybe motivated by business growth and success or profit or whatever, sometimes those core values aren't aligned. Sometimes the actual rules for how you can participate in a license are so let's call it idiosyncratic to be nice, that the way the partnership is set up from the get-go isn't exactly probably how it ought to be or would be if there were less regulatory constraints. So I'm wondering if that plays a role in people maybe are too eager sometimes and they say, oh, let's go for it, whatever, and don't actually think it through of how things will evolve and play out. And then before you know it, the lawyers
They're
are
at each other's
beast.
throats.
Yeah,
Right. I think
exactly.
that's a really interesting perspective. And yes, I agree that the regulatory idiosyncrasies, to use your word, definitely play a role, because we're seeing, especially in New York, in your example, we're seeing what I call marriages of convenience, where people don't have a ton in common, probably wouldn't choose to work together otherwise, but everybody wants to get rich, or get richer, and so this is the path forward. And yeah, I have seen more than one of those sort of, I'll call them business divorces, because people don't have a good working relationship. They're trying to move forward, but they don't know how to rely on one another. They don't know how to trust one another. And I think sometimes they're coming from very different cultures. And to add to that, to continue using New York as an example, I'm almost certain that the rules state that if you have a social equity license, you can only sell it to another social equity licensee. So people in that situation, if they want to sell it, it's not as simple as just finding a buyer. They have to find somebody who meets the exact same requirements. And that usually means they'll have to work together longer rather than just breaking up when the relationship no longer serves. So yeah, I do think some of the regulations and the compliance constraints contribute to a fractious network or a fractious industry. Although I will add that human beings, we're very good at not getting along. We will find very trivial reasons to hate one another. That's I don't think saying that is revolutionary.
No, but it's funny, it's true, and I agree with you. And I'm laughing. I'm like, maybe I'm too good at that. But but, let me ask you this, because we've been talking about the situation of these business breakups, but I wonder, I'm trying to hear more about some other use cases for mediation, and I'm curious about, one of the big things that was been in the headlines the last few weeks and months, and that's been an issue in this industry for far too long, unfortunately, has been the outstanding receivables and people just not getting paid for their products or services. And so I'm wondering if those are situations that can be mediated as well.
Frequently, the answer, yes, the answer frequently is yes. Yeah, so I don't want to give too much away, but I am talking right now with a person who funded, let's see, they funded a producer who was going to white label product, who was supposed to white label product. That was the agreement. Person A supplied capital and some equipment and a lot of experience and know-how. Person or entity B was supposed to supply the actual production of the product. Something went sideways. Entity B did not want to go forward, stopped replying to messages, and we are contemplating mediation for this, because, and I think this is something we should talk about, is the cost of mediation is very literally a fraction of litigation. And litigation is the typical method for resolving these disputes, which is unfortunate for a variety of reasons. Litigation there will be a winner and a loser. That's guaranteed. So everybody goes forward thinking they're going to be the winner, and it's not possible for them to be the loser. Otherwise, they would not agree to this. But in reality, you have a 50-50 shot of getting what you want. There is also, anytime there's litigation, there is a risk that something will get hung up on a procedural issue. That does not happen with mediation, but litigation has this risk of, oh, was this motion filed correctly or on time or by the proper parties? Was process served correctly? And if those standards are not met, it has the potential to derail the whole thing. And if the suit is dismissed with prejudice, that means it's over. You cannot bring this to the court again. So you are left having spent, I don't know, maybe tens of thousands of dollars. This is not resolved, and the court doesn't want to hear about it anymore. Mediation allows both parties to work together, even though it may be contentious, even though they may not want to come up with a result that works for both of them. You have the ability to compromise. I can't think of a time in mediation where there is one winner and one loser. That's not how it works. So you have some say in the outcome, and the risk of, I don't know, a procedural snag derailing everything is minimal.
I would joke that in litigation you have a clear winner and loser. The attorney is the winner and the client is the loser usually, and both sides end up spending a ton of money and
Yes.
time and stress, and then ending up likely unsatisfied because it's
Yeah.
the juice is not worth the squeeze often unless it's like very clearly one-sided, and even in those situations it's totally possible to just spend way too much money and a bunch of time and stress and to get a pyrrhic victory, and like what was the point of that? So I personally am a big proponent for mediation, because if you're gonna be in conflict and if you truly want a solution, I think here's the challenge that I can imagine is that people get vengeful and spiteful and bitter and all this stuff, and to really mediate effectively, I believe, I don't know, I don't have a ton of experience with it, but you have to actually want to get to a solution, as opposed to I want to make this person suffer, this entity, they did me wrong, so blah, blah, blah. So I think I'd imagine that's probably the challenge, but I'm willing to bet that for the cannabis, for a lot of the situations, like I don't know, maybe I'm a foolish optimist, but I'm willing to bet that the majority of times it's people have good intentions and they want to, like even in this situation you alluded to, it's like I'm sure they had good intentions and wanted to make this thing work, and it wasn't like someone screwed someone and blah 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 blah, in which case like it could get litigious and nasty and all that. But like if people are willing to, keep the peace, which I feel like most cannabis people are, all the people I've come across in the last decade in this industry, for the most part seem to be, people who believe in the plant, that yes, want to make some money and want to grow in the industry. But, I think for the most part, people, as long as they remember what they actually got involved in it for, can hopefully, get to that peaceful place of, okay, let's actually have a resolution here and work together instead of going to court and
Yeah, I think that's an
the
interesting
lawyers.
point. A lot of people get into this industry because they want to help people, because they see the value of marijuana as medicine, even if it's an adult use program and not specifically for medical purposes. There are still plenty of people in the adult use market who are self-medicating effectively and correctly and rightly so with marijuana. So I think there's value in mediating disputes, and I think it helps return us to our heritage a little bit, because as you said in the beginning, this was a network. Our heritage is the traditional illicit market, and our heritage relied entirely on relationships and connections. in the traditional market, if you had a problem with someone, you couldn't sue them. That would have been supremely foolish. So what I know some people tried to do is find a neutral third party to sort of help them resolve it. And obviously they weren't usually a trained mediator, but they were somebody with authority or with respect who could help people work out the problem. So mediation is, I don't know, a kind of a return to our roots in some sense. And I also think we probably ought to mention, as we see more and more social equity licensees, I think we ought to keep in mind that those people, and for very good reasons, they tend to be skeptical of our government and its motives and its efficacy, to include the court system. Many of them have had profoundly negative experiences with the government's courts. So they may not be in a position or willing to run back there the minute they have a problem with somebody. So that's another reason mediation applies or has the potential to help an awful lot of people.
I love that. I think that's a wonderful insight, that, it's getting back to our roots, so to speak. And, cannabis itself is, it's all about homeostasis, right? So let's model that, right? And mediate instead of go into conflict and litigate and fight. Although I imagine that sometimes violence was used to settle
Probably
this.
that too. Yes, that certainly that certainly happened.
Yeah.
But yeah,
But that's for another episode. We'll
yes.
talk about that on a different show with a different guest.
And for the record, that's not how I resolve disputes. It's not with violence, just to be totally clear.
That's right. Bethany kills him with kindness.
Yeah, there you go.
Cool. So let's shift gears to maybe, how about this? How about a misconception of the cannabis industry that still persists?
That it is unserious and unfocused, and run by, I don't know, teenagers in pajamas, or immature people in pajamas. That stigma I've been facing for the last 10 years. Colorado is kind of a wonderful bubble where I don't run into that so much anymore, but I do encounter it. I definitely still encounter that. I wonder if New York is the same way, or if you're still experiencing that stigma out there. But yeah, I think the overarching idea is that the industry is unserious and maybe even a flash in the pan and won't be here in another 10 years, which clearly isn't the case.
Yeah, cool. And I agree with you. I think there's less of that, but it all depends on, certainly for some people, it's still very much that impression. But, it is what it is. I'm with you that clearly this industry is not going to disappear. It's only going to grow in the long term. We'll just have to wait and prove those people wrong again. I guess on the flip side, let me ask you, what in the industry are you most excited about, or what's a trend or something that you've seen recently that makes you feel positive about the industry?
I'm excited about social equity, and I know that there is more work to be done. I want to say that. I understand these programs have, I don't think a single one of them has gone without a hitch. And I understand, like, there are a lot of people who are excluded who shouldn't be excluded, but I'm excited by this trend. I am excited for the idea that, what if this industry was unlike every other American industry and was not dominated by middle-aged white men? Like, what if that was not the case? So I'm excited to see more social equity licensees. And I'm also excited about the possible idea of descheduling or rescheduling, though I understand the current administration, that's not at all a priority. So I don't know. It was exciting. I don't know if if I have any cause to remain excited about that, because it doesn't seem like it's going to happen.
Well, I think with the new administration, anything can happen because they're kind of, a little wild, but let's see. I agree that it's clearly not a priority for them and not a lot of reason to be optimistic about it. But then again, let's see if RFK gets confirmed. He seems to like pot. Elon Musk seems to like all sorts of substances. So who knows? Who knows? But yeah, I wouldn't bet on it today. But in any case, I kind of hold the view that a decade from now we'll have some significant federal legalization. So we'll see, just a matter of time.
Yeah.
Um, Let me ask you, what makes you well suited to be an effective mediator?
Oh, great question. My background in compliance and understanding the regulations and the overarching policy of the state by state market, that's a real benefit. There are cannabis mediators. There are not very many. And what I'm seeing is if businesses have to go to mediation, too often they are sort of paired with a mediator who doesn't know very much about the industry. And I heard a story, this is true, out of, I think, Nevada a couple of weeks ago, where it was two cannabis businesses who had to go to mediation. They had a mediator who did not know anything about it. And at one point, the mediator asked one of the parties, well, is it so bad that the other side sold an eighth to a 16-year-old? Which, if you're listening, yes, that is the pinnacle of bad things. That is sort of the tippy top of bad things you can do. That, but this mediator didn't know that, and so was not mediating from a position of authority or even knowledge.
Hmm.
So one, I have that. Two, I think I'm a fantastic listener, and I genuinely want to help people resolve things. I spent a lot of my time a couple of years ago. It was a situation in New York, exactly like what you said, where we have a marriage of convenience between a social equity licensee who has a lot of know-how and a lot of knowledge about the plant itself, but doesn't know a ton about business and certainly doesn't know a ton about regulations. And then we have a sort of very well heeled, very professional businessman on the other side who is impatient and doesn't have a lot of respect for his now partner. And I was trying to help this process go forward and help them get a license. So I was in the unofficial capacity of trying to mediate between them. No, that's not what this guy meant. Could you maybe could you speak a little bit more respectfully to your new partner, like trying to help these guys move forward? In the end, it didn't work out. They could not get beyond their own prejudice. But that was kind of when I first started noticing, like, we really need some sort of mediation in this industry. Somebody needs to be able to help these people get beyond silly, long-held prejudices.
Yeah, I think it's tricky, right? Because we're creatures of habit and
We fear
even
change.
yeah, yeah. Well, so let me ask you about alternative dispute resolution because this is a new term for me. And so I'm just curious to know a little more about that and how mediation fits into that and in general, if there's a listener out there who might end up in one of these situations, whether in cannabis business or otherwise, and they want to seek mediation, how does someone go about that?
Right. So alternative dispute resolution, I think it's helpful to know that it's attorneys who made the term, right? And for them, the standard method of dispute resolution is going to court. So anything that is not going to court is an alternative. That said, ADR primarily means arbitration and mediation. And just because I know those terms get confused, so if any listeners are confused about that, arbitration is there is still a winner and a loser. That's something to keep in mind. It moves a lot faster than litigation, but you have sort of another neutral third party who will make they run it a little bit like a court. They can, most of them do. They don't have to. It's going to depend on what arbitrator you choose. But they will make rulings on motions of evidence, motions of procedure. And then at the end, they will come up with who's a winner and who's a loser. It costs less than litigation, and it will move much, much faster. The downside is that it still costs more than mediation, and you still have a winner and a loser. So that's arbitration. And then mediation is what we have said before, where a neutral third party helps two people or two parties to reconcile what differences in such a manner that they have a say over the consensus that they reach. So, and when you are considering any sort of ADR, the first thing I want people to understand is go to your contract. And you really, if you don't have one, then I am giving you side eye right now. Make sure that your contract has a method of dispute resolution. First of all, like full stop. If we don't get along, how are we going to solve the problem? Number two, I really recommend that be mediation. You will save money. In many cases, you get to keep the relationship, and you might even be able to keep the business going forward if you choose mediation. If you choose any of the other two, arbitration or litigation, that's almost guaranteed no. So go to your contract and make sure you have a method of dispute resolution that starts with mediation. And something else to keep in mind, if mediation fails, you can still go to court. It does not remove that potential outcome. You still have the option to sue somebody, and all of your negotiations will be kept confidential. So if you make somebody an offer during your mediation negotiations, that cannot be admitted as evidence if and when it goes to court. So you should have the option to negotiate in good faith when you're in mediation.
Okay, cool. Why don't we shift gears, and if you're open to it, do a little bit of coaching, and I'll just ask you, what is a business challenge that you're currently experiencing
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this, Michael.
Uh-oh. Me too. No.
Okay. A business challenge I'm experiencing is people don't know a ton about mediation. And I think, very basic business development. I need to get my name and my brand out there so that people understand that this is a legitimate choice and is probably the best method of dispute resolution, if we're being honest. How do I get people to lean into it?
Good question. So what do you think?
I think I'm doing it right now, or at least I'm starting to with this podcast.
What else could you pursue?
Is this part of the strategy where I coach myself?
That's always part of the strategy. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's what we have always done in this industry is you network like there's no tomorrow. Get out there and give out business cards or shake hands, use LinkedIn, etc.
I'm with you 100% on the network piece. So who in your existing network could be point of leverage for you, or it could help you either through promotion, referrals?
Yeah, I am working with somebody to help me do some marketing right now. I also get some referrals from attorneys. I'd like to get more referrals from attorneys. So yeah, I am reaching out to the cannabis people who are in the cannabis attorneys and other cannabis marketers to make sure that they know that this is an option. Because human nature and the nature of this industry and its problems with having conflict, that's not the issue. Like there's no shortage of conflict. I just need people to lean into resolving their conflicts peacefully.
Right. And is there any particular like niche of people, or I don't know if I'm going to make it up, like growers probably not growers, but like, certain types of businesses or operators or segments that you've seen, especially,
Yeah, it's probably not growers, but I don't know I think everyone has problems with their contractors and their vendors, and as we've talked about, there's the trend of people just not paying their bills. That's really unfortunate, and it needs to stop. It's not right, and I shouldn't have to explain that to anyone. That needs to stop, and one way to make it stop is through mediation.
Right. So I guess what's been I I'm not exactly hearing a challenge. It sounds like to me you're doing the process and you're
Mhm.
taking the steps. So I'm wondering if there's, you
Okay,
know,
so can I flip it? What challenges do you see?
hmm, as far as what, getting adoption for mediation or getting the word out there or
Sure, for any part of the mediation pipeline.
hmm, I think I think the challenge is going to be getting people to pay the bills, just like anything else, right? In cannabis. That being said, I think I don't know. I think the tricky thing off the top of my head is like if there's a conflict, you need to get both parties to agree that this is the route they want to go or that they want to work with you. And so it's kind of like how do you get two people or two parties in a conflict to agree on anything, especially if things are heated. So so two things come to mind. One is I would look at how in other industries
Mhm.
successful mediators or independent mediators have driven business and kind of learn from those models and examples, and see if there's like, I don't know if there's anyone who's like crushing it in like mediation in a niche industry or whatever, or so I would look to see is there an example of success that I could replicate? And then the second thing would be, and maybe this is more tactical and kind of maybe the same, a more nuanced version of the same thing, which would be like, what is something that you could offer to give people, I don't know, a taste or an example or help them experience like because maybe one party in the conflict reaches out to you, for example. I'm guessing that's usually how it is, right? One person or one party reaches out to you. Then from that point, how do you get either you or them to get the other party on board? So I guess I'm asking you about the process to see if there's something that you could, leverage there or maybe even automate in some way to get it easier to get both parties on board or to find some common ground. Um,
Yeah, maybe meeting with parties when the relationship is new and shiny. In the honeymoon phase, when everything still seems possible and you really like and respect each other, or you're willing to look past the parts you don't like or respect. Meet with them for, I don't know, and decide, just so everybody has a positive opinion of one another.
so that's very interesting because I like what you're suggesting, kind of like going upstream and getting into these relationships, so to speak, before things go bad. So it's
Mhm.
almost like a pre-marriage counseling or whatever.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
so maybe, and I don't know if you already do this or maybe it's like offering some kind of audit, or to make sure they have those conflict resolution clauses in their contract since to make sure they've thought about these things before signing a contract. So I don't know. I think that could be a very interesting service, right? That doesn't have to be expensive, where it could be fairly straightforward of, you run them through the checklist or whatnot and get to know both parties. And I think that could be very interesting.
Yeah,
How's that
I
sound?
like that idea. Doing sort of a business relationship audit, and that term needs to be tweaked, but that's the essence of what it is.
Right.
To find out where are the potentials for conflict,
Hmm.
and especially like look at do they have a contract because they should, like how do they plan to work together, what is the hoped for outcome, what is the most likely outcome, and then also get into the backgrounds of the individuals, like where did party A go to school, where is party A from, what support for this business does either party have, and figure out, I don't know, the potential for if they can get along long term. There's I'm blanking on the name, but there's a marriage and relationship counselor who I want Gutman,
Oh yeah,
something.
John Gutman. Yeah.
Yes. And he and his partner, they have a way of, I think within 20 or 30 minutes, like they can look at a relationship and tell if it'll survive.
Hmm.
Um, so something akin to that, but for businesses.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting. The challenge I is you're gonna run into, well, how do you market that and get people to do that?
Yeah.
And then, we're kind of back to square one of like, well, what are the referral sources? How do you get the word out about that? But the fundamentals of marketing don't really change, of getting the word out there, of, getting people to try the product, and and building the referrals and all that fun stuff. But I do like this idea a lot for you of kind of offering not just the breakup side of things, but also the I guess the pre-commitment track.
Yeah.
And it's funny, I think back to my very first coach that I worked with more than a decade ago, and she was helping me with a contract, and then that ended up being a business divorce in the end. But one of the things that back then, when I was fairly new to all this stuff and business and entrepreneurship and all this stuff, she explained to me that all of this stuff goes into the contract up front, of how if the company, if one partner wants to leave, if someone dies, if someone's unable to, all of this stuff is figured out up front. And I thought, oh yeah, that makes so much sense. Like, you figure it out when things are good, before you're at war and hate each other and all that stuff. So you can mitigate that situation, not have to deal with it. I think there's something very interesting there. I think I have a hunch that you probably have some attorneys in your network that might be able to refer you some newly formed partnerships or businesses as like a test case. And then I don't know, I think there's tremendous value in offering that. And it seems to me that from my own experience and from seeing so many other friends and colleagues who have gone through this, the unfortunate full life cycle of a business relationship, that too often this step is skipped, especially in cannabis, because everyone's all, oh, it doesn't help
We get
having,
excited. We're
they get
human
excited,
beings.
they
We
get
get
stoned.
excited. There's something new and shiny at the end of the road. Let's rush to it. Let's not ask any questions, or stop and ponder if this is even worth it or how we're going to get there. No, 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 no. Let's just
Yep,
rush towards what we want.
exactly. And then there's the euphoria of the cannabis in the mix, and
Right?
the vibe is, and it's like, no, the vibe is not sufficient for ensuring longevity of a relationship in the
Mhm.
business, especially in a business as tumultuous as cannabis. So
Right.
I think this is perhaps even more than the mediation, such a big gap here. Now, how do you get people to be aware of it and buy into it? That's a question that I hopefully we help some people with just in hearing this podcast to think, oh yeah, what a reasonable, practical thing to do. Why haven't I done that? Or I should do that. But I think too often, that step gets skipped. And, in theory, if you have a great lawyer, they will help you do that. But unfortunately, I think that it's too easy for for everyone involved to just skip that step for whatever reason and not take the time to, because they want to move quickly and race towards the goal, as you said. So um just got to think of a nice name for this, the
Yeah. I don't know, the contract inception relationship gauge. That's a terrible name, but that's
yeah. Let's definitely not call it that, but
okay. Yeah.
I think it's like it's like the relationship foundation or
Oh yeah.
or the incubation session or something like
Yeah.
that, where you're it's like the when the relationship is still in veg or not even, it's
Mm,
still in that
mhm.
baby stage. You want those strong roots. So
Right.
I don't know. I think relationship incubator, that could be, but it's also the crazy thing about it is like it could literally take an hour or like a couple of
Yeah.
hours at most
Yeah.
to avoid potentially dozens or hundreds of hours of stress, chaos, crazy expense. So it really is a no-brainer. It's just, I think your challenge is people lacking the awareness of this critical need and this potential critical error. And the way that I would communicate maybe that urgency is by giving some specific examples of litigation costs, and not, and
Yeah.
saying like, hey, here's like three common stories of, these people didn't have a contract. That's the worst, or these people had a contract, but didn't have this, it ended up being this much, like, when you make it really concrete, I think that helps, because it's like, oh, I could spend a couple $100 right now or whatever to potentially save myself six figures. Like,
Mhm.
yeah, let's go, um and also I think it's crucial in cannabis to vet, to background check and to really know, if you're signing up for a business marriage, know who you're getting in bed with, and to have an extra set of eyes and ears of someone who's been doing this for a decade and understands the industries and the regulation and the characters that, there are some recurring archetypes in this industry for sure. So you'd be foolish not to do it.
And I think something we probably ought to mention, we see this a lot with the wealthiest people in our society, the people who make fantastic business owners, and they can make very good leaders, and they're very innovative and very competitive. They are not always the best communicators. So working with them is sometimes challenging. I mean, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos, these people are very innovative. These stories about working with them are pretty terrible. Like, they are not easy to work with because, in part, for many reasons, but in part because they don't want to communicate. And for some of them, they don't see the value in communicating.
Mhm.
So that's, yeah, figure that out before you get business married with a plan to do something. Because also, partnerships really easy to get into, like marriages, um, really complicated, difficult, and expensive to get out of.
Absolutely. I think you touched on a key thing there, which is, going back to the, kind of the diversity within the industry of when you bring these people together, eh, that have very different backgrounds, um, sometimes they communicate really differently. And so
Mhm.
just having someone who's objective and neutral and can be that bridge, that can make a world of difference of just helping them understand each other so that they could actually communicate effectively and work together, as opposed to potentially having the best intentions, having alignment, but maybe just having different communication styles, and that in and of itself could create massive conflict, even when both parties are in earnest wanting to do the right thing and work together and make it work. So to me, it's I think I think there's a lot of value in this concept, the
Mhm.
we'll call it the pre-mediation or whatever, but
Yeah,
I think so. I'd be curious to check in with you a few months from now to see if you end up pursuing this and how that all goes, because I think it could be really interesting. And again, I don't see why. I think you'd be foolish not to do it if you're partnered
right.
with someone, because often what do people do in this industry? What I've seen is like you're like, hey, I'm thinking of working with so and so. You call a few friends that know so and so. Hey, what do you know about so and so? And
Mhm.
it's like, I mean, that's a good start, but that's not sufficient, right?
Yeah,
Let's be honest. That's not like you wouldn't get married to someone, like forget business if you're like, hey, like, do you know anything about so and so? Oh, they're nice. Okay, good, fine,
yeah.
cool. That's
They're nice. She likes the same kind of music.
yeah, yeah.
So
Bethany, I know we're coming up on time. I know you have a commitment here in a couple of minutes. So I want to, first of all, thank you for being here and sharing this work that you're doing and allowing me to brainstorm with you on it. It's been a pleasure. Before I let you go, I wanted to know, is there any last words, final thoughts, anything you want to share that maybe we didn't get to today? I want to just give you the space to share
yeah.
whatever you might be called
Well,
to.
thank you very much for having me, Michael. And for any listeners, if you're curious, you can find me at marijuanamediation.com.
Excellent. Love that. Nice and simple.
Yeah.
And soon expanding to pl- to romantic relationships and platonic relationships, not
Yes.
just business. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. But who knows? Maybe not, because with I've 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 mediated more than one conflict in my
Mhm.
romantic relationship with marijuana. So, you know,
Nice.
just kidding. No, I'm not kidding actually. But anyway, I'm why don't we end on that silly note? And I'll thank you again, Bethany, and I wish you nothing but success in this new venture of yours, which I think will potentially save this industry a whole lot of headache and heartache. So good for you for offering something that's actually valuable and solves a real problem, which,
Thank
for
you.
anyone listening out there, I think that's step one. If you want to get into this industry and have success, you have to actually add value and solve real problems. So, um, yeah, with that said, thanks for
Thank you for
joining
having
us.
me.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and I'll to the listeners and viewers at home, we'll catch you on the next episode. Have a great day.
Hi, Mike Z is. Hi, Mike Z is. Hi, Mike Z is.
The Cannabis Business Coach. Hi, Mike Z is. Hi, Mike Z is. Hi, Mike Z is.
The Cannabis Business Coach.